She was a virgin and terrified until the cowboy gave her a blanket and his daughter gave her a drawing of them. Together, snow fell in thick wet flakes over the cattle market in Redstone, Texas in the winter of 1869. Jack's jaw tightened as he swallowed hard, his throat working against a tide of anger. He hadn't come here for this, not for trouble, not for saving. He'd come for a horse, plain and simple. But Lily's wide eyes stayed fixed on the girl in chains, and Jack felt her small hand squeeze his, as if pleading without words. He couldn't look away now. Abigail stood like a lamb before wolves, her face pale, her breath coming in clouds of fear. The men bidding weren't thinking of saving her, they were thinking of using her, owning her. 30. Amos Reed barked again, his thick fingers drumming the handle of his whip. The crowd murmured. The price was climbing. Jack's hand went to his coat pocket, where a small leather pouch sat heavy with coins. Not much. Just enough to buy the horse he needed to haul timber through the winter. Just enough to survive. "Papa," Lily whispered again. "She looks cold." Jack looked down at his daughter. The scarf had slipped from her cheek, and he saw the same gentleness her mother once carried. The gentleness that had died with her. His chest tightened. The auctioneer's voice rose. 35. "Do I hear 40? Caleb Warwick's grin spread wider. "Worth every cent," he muttered, his eyes on Abigail. Jack's pulse thudded in his ears. His whole life had been about keeping his head down, working his land, and protecting Lily. But he knew the look in Abigail's eyes. The desperate, breaking look of someone about to be lost forever. He exhaled slow. Then his voice cut through the square. 50. The crowd stilled. Heads snapped toward the man with the little girl at his side. Jack stepped forward, his face shadowed under the brim of his hat, his hand steady as it pressed the pouch of coins into the air. Abigail's breath hitched. Amos spat his cigar to the mud. Caleb Warwick's smirk faltered, just for a second. And Lily squeezed her father's hand tighter, as though she knew he had just changed all of their lives. The auctioneer blinked, his mouth hanging open for half a heartbeat, before he slapped the gavel against the block. "Sold. To the cowboy with 50. His voice cracked with surprise, but the crowd roared with whistles and mutters, half in disbelief, half in envy. Abigail's chains rattled as the blacksmith hurried forward to unlock her irons. Her knees trembled so badly she nearly collapsed, the bite of iron leaving red welts on her wrists. She dared a glance toward the man who had spoken for her. The brim of his hat shadowed most of his face, but she saw his jawline, tight with resolve, and his hand resting protectively on the shoulder of the little girl beside him. Amos Reed stormed toward the platform, his fists like hammers at his sides. "You think you can walk in here, Heron, and outbid me? That girl was mine." Jack's gaze snapped to him, steady as a loaded gun. "She was for sale, Reed, and I bought her fair." "She ain't worth $50, Amos spat. "Not for working, not for—" "That's enough." Jack's voice was sharp, low, but carried through the square like a warning bell. Lily pressed closer to his side. Caleb Warwick's smirk returned, colder now. He studied Jack the way a snake might study a boot heel hovering above it. "You must be richer or dumber than I figured, Heron. Paying 50 for damaged goods. That girl don't know how to cook or clean worth a dime. She's only fit for one thing." Jack stepped up onto the platform, his boots sinking into the wet wood. He took Abigail gently by the arm, shielding her behind his frame, his other hand hovering near the revolver at his hip. His voice was steady, deadly calm. "She's mine now, and if any man here doubts it, he can step forward." The square fell into silence. A few men shuffled, but none met his eye. Amos's lips curled, but even he stopped short. The weight of Jack Heron's stare was enough to hold him back. Abigail stood frozen, her body trembling. But when Jack's coat brushed her arm, a strange flicker of safety sparked through the storm of her fear. Jack bent slightly, whispering low so only she could hear, "Come on, time to go." Abigail nodded, though her throat burned with unshed tears. She clutched her arms around herself and followed him down the steps. Lily reached out her little hand without hesitation and slipped it into Abigail's. Startled, Abigail glanced down. The girl's eyes, warm, trusting, met hers. And for the first time in weeks, Abigail felt the smallest ember of hope. Behind them, Caleb's voice cut through the market like a knife. "This ain't over, Heron. No man crosses me and walks away clean. You took what's mine." Jack didn't look back. He tightened his hold on his daughter's hand and kept walking, his voice low but hard. "She was never yours." The snow kept falling, soft and relentless, muffling the square's noise as Jack led Abigail and Lily toward his horse. But behind them, promises of vengeance lingered in the winter air. The snow deepened as Jack lifted Lily onto the saddle, then turned to Abigail. She stood uncertain, arms wrapped around herself, thin dress no match for the cold. Without a word, Jack swung off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Get up," he said gently, offering his hand. Her fingers trembled as they touched his, the warmth startling after hours in iron. He lifted her easily, setting her behind Lily, then mounted in front. The horse shifted under their weight, but Jack held the reins steady, his broad back shielding them both from the wind. Abigail clung to the fabric of his coat, her cheek pressed against his shoulder blade. She hadn't been on a horse since she was a child, and the closeness made her pulse race. But Lily, tucked between them, glanced up at Abigail with a smile as if this had always been the way things were meant to be. The town receded behind them, lanterns flickering through the snow. Abigail dared to breathe, yet her mind spun. What happens now? Did I just trade one master for another? Hours passed before the outline of a small ranch came into view, lantern light glowing from the windows. The fences were worn, the barn roof patched with mismatched boards, but smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth. Jack dismounted, lifting Lily down first. Then he turned to Abigail, hands outstretched. She hesitated, staring at the calloused palms. But Lily's small voice broke her fear. "It's okay. Papa, don't let nobody fall." Abigail let him guide her down. Her feet hit the snow, knees nearly buckling, but Jack steadied her. For a fleeting second, their eyes met, hers full of doubt, his steady, unreadable. He led them inside. The cabin smelled faintly of wood smoke and bread. Simple but clean. A quilt hung over the back of a chair. The fire crackled low, casting shadows across the room. Abigail's body sagged with exhaustion, yet she remained standing, hands clasped tight, unsure where she belonged. Jack poured water into a basin, set it on the table, then met her eyes. "Sit. Warm yourself. You'll get sick standing there." His tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't tender either. Just firm, solid, real. Abigail sank into the chair, the fire's heat biting at her frozen skin until it hurt. Lily climbed into her lap without hesitation, her little arms wrapping around Abigail's waist. Shocked, Abigail froze. Then slowly, her own arms came up, encircling the child. For the first time in weeks, her tears fell silent, hidden in the girl's hair. Jack turned away, stoking the fire, giving her space. But his jaw tightened. He knew Caleb Warwick wouldn't let this go. And by bringing the girl here, he hadn't just bought trouble. He'd invited it through his own door. The steps paused, a moment of silence stretching long enough to make her breath catch. Abigail pulled the blanket tighter, her nails digging into the coarse fabric. Then Jack's voice came, low and even through the wood. "There's stew on the table. Eat while it's warm. Lily's asleep." That was all. His footsteps retreated, floorboards creaking until the house was quiet again. Abigail sat frozen. No demand. No key turning in the lock. Just stew. Her stomach ached with hunger, but suspicion warred with need. At last she crept out. The fire in the hearth glowed softly. On the table sat a chipped bowl of rabbit stew, steam curling faintly in the air. A slice of bread, rough but fresh, lay beside it. Abigail's hands trembled as she picked up the spoon. Each bite burned down her throat, warming a hollow she hadn't realized was so deep. From the other room, She could hear the faint rhythm of Jack's voice as he hummed something for his daughter. A lullaby, she guessed, low and steady. The sound of a man who'd rocked a child to sleep too many nights alone. Abigail wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and whispered to herself, "What does he want from me?" Later, when she returned to her cot, she noticed a folded quilt at the foot of the bed that hadn't been there before. She pressed her face to the worn fabric. It smelled of smoke and pine. Sleep came fitful, broken by dreams of chains and gavel strikes. Yet when dawn bled gray across the frost-touched window, she woke to the faint smell of coffee. Jack was at the table, pulling on his boots. He didn't look up as she entered, only spoke in that same steady tone. "Barn needs tending. You don't have to, but there's always work if you want to earn your keep." Abigail's heart tightened. There it is, she thought. The catch. The price. But when Jack finally looked at her, his eyes weren't hungry nor calculating. Just tired. Tired, and maybe a little guarded. Before she could answer, Lily came bounding in, hair messy from sleep. She grinned up at Abigail, slipping her small hand into hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Come see the chickens with me," Lily said, tugging eagerly. And for the first time since the chains fell, Abigail felt her lips twitch toward something she thought she'd lost forever. A smile. The morning air bit sharp as Abigail stepped outside with Lily tugging at her hand. Frost still clung to the grass, and the sky was the color of steel. The small ranch looked plain. Weathered fences, a leaning barn, smoke curling from the chimney. But after the market square, it seemed like another world. Lily skipped ahead, pointing at a pair of hens scratching the dirt. "That one's Bessie and that one's Molly," she announced proudly. The chickens scattered at her approach, wings flapping. Abigail's lips curved in spite of herself. She knelt to brush a hand over the feathers one hen left behind, smooth and soft against her fingers. It reminded her she hadn't touched anything gentle in what felt like forever. Jack came out then, hat pulled low, an axe resting against his shoulder. He gave her a brief nod, not lingering on her the way men at the market had. "Fence needs mending after last storm. I'll be out back if you need something." No demands, no leer, just words as plain as the morning itself. Abigail watched him stride across the yard, boots crunching frost, shoulders broad and steady. A man who seemed built more from silence than speech. "Papa's strong," Lily said with the matter-of-factness only a child had. "But he's lonely." She looked up at Abigail, eyes wide, almost searching. "You looked lonely too. Maybe you don't gotta be." Abigail's throat tightened. She smoothed Lily's hair, uncertain how to answer. The day passed in quiet rhythm. Abigail fed chickens, swept the hearth, even stitched a tear in Lily's dress with thread she found in a tin. Each small task pushed the memory of iron chains a little further back. But when the sun slipped low and shadows stretched long, the unease returned. She stood by the window watching Jack out by the fence line, hammer striking wood. Why did he buy me? The question gnawed at her. No man spent that kind of money for nothing. And somewhere in town, she knew, Amos Reed nursed his rage. He wasn't a man to let go of something he thought was his. Abigail shivered, pulling the quilt tighter around her shoulders. For the first time, she wasn't sure what frightened her more, Amos finding her, or the possibility that Jack Harland might be exactly what he seemed. "Come see," Lily whispered, tugging her toward the small shelf by the hearth. Abigail followed, unsure what to expect. Lily reached up on tiptoe and pulled down a worn wooden horse, its edges chipped smooth from years of play. "Papa carved it," Lily said proudly, holding it out. "He made it for me when Mama got sick. Said it would keep me brave." Abigail took the little horse carefully, the wood warm from Lily's small hands. The carving was rough but steady, each line cut with patience rather than skill. She traced the shape with her fingers, her throat tightening. This wasn't the work of a man who only thought of himself. Jack entered quietly, wiping his hands on a rag after finishing outside. His eyes flicked to the toy in Abigail's hands. For the first time, his hardened expression softened. "She won't sleep without it," he said simply. Lily giggled and tucked the horse against her cheek before running off to fetch a blanket for Abigail's cot. Abigail stood there, caught between confusion and something she couldn't name. Every act of Jack's had been silent, restrained. No leering, no demands. Just space, warmth, and small gestures that seemed to protect rather than claim. Yet the echo of Caleb Warwick's words haunted her. Property. Could any man truly see her as more than that? As night fell again, Abigail lay awake in her cot, listening to Lily's soft breaths from the next room and the steady creak of floorboards as Jack moved about. She clutched the wooden horse Lily had left with her, its weight oddly comforting. But even as her body rested, her mind whispered questions. Why had Jack spent so much to save her? What would Amos Reed do now that she had slipped through his hands? And most of all, what would happen if she began to trust this man, only to find herself broken again? The next morning dawned gray, the air sharp with frost. Abigail woke early, drawn by the sound of boots crunching outside. She peeked through the small window and saw Jack saddling his horse, his movements precise, practiced. He looked like a man readying himself for trouble. At the table, Lily munched on an apple, swinging her legs. "Papa's goin' into town," she chirped. "Says he'll be back by sundown." Abigail's chest tightened. Town. That meant Redstone. That meant Amos Reed. The memory of his grin at the auction twisted her stomach. She hurried to the door just as Jack swung into the saddle. "Where are you going?" she asked before she could stop herself, her voice sharper than intended. Jack paused, the reins in his hands, his gaze steady on her. "Supplies. Feed. Tools I can't make myself." His tone was plain, not defensive, but Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks for questioning him. "Still," she pressed, "it's dangerous. Amos, he won't just let this go." Jack studied her a long moment, then nodded once. "I know." His voice dropped lower, firmer. "That's why I'm going. Warwick and his kind think they own this land, these people. They don't own me, and they sure as hell don't own you anymore." Abigail flinched, hugging the borrowed coat closer. She wanted to believe him, but fear kept her spine stiff. He softened just barely. "Keep the door barred while I'm gone. Stay close to Lily." With that, he nudged his horse forward, disappearing into the white horizon. In Redstone, the town buzzed with whispers. Amos Reed sat in the corner of the saloon, his jaw tight, a whiskey glass trembling in his hand. Caleb Warwick leaned beside him, his eyes cold and calculating. "You let a drifter steal what was yours," Caleb said, his tone mocking but edged with threat. Amos slammed his glass down, the sound cracking through the room. $50 for a slip of a girl. Harlan thinks he's a hero. I'll see her dragged back by her hair before winter's done." Caleb smirked, tilting his hat back. "Careful. Harlan's no greenhorn. Lost his wife, keeps to himself. But a man with something to protect. That makes him weak." The two men shared a dark silence, plans unspoken but clear. Back at the ranch, Abigail tried to busy her hands with chores, but her thoughts were restless. Lily insisted on showing her how to collect eggs from the coop, her laughter chasing away the cold. For a fleeting moment, as Abigail crouched beside the little girl, she felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. But when dusk settled and Jack's horse finally returned, Abigail's heart lurched. She met him at the door, searching his face for signs of trouble. His eyes, weary but calm, met hers. "Town's talking," he said quietly, setting down the sacks. "Reed's not done." Abigail swallowed hard. She'd feared it, but hearing it confirmed sent a shiver down her spine. Jack glanced toward Lily, then back to Abigail. "You're not alone in this. Not anymore." The words lingered, heavier than the winter sky. For the first time, Abigail wondered if trust, fragile, terrifying trust, might be the only way forward. The gunshot cracked through the cold evening air, startling the horses. They reared and stamped, snorting clouds of steam. Hull yanked on his reins, his horse sidestepping wildly. Caleb Warwick's sneer faltered, his eyes narrowing on Jack. "You'll regret that," Warwick growled. But his voice lacked the absolute command it once held over Redstone. Jack didn't lower the rifle. His stance was unshakable, shoulders squared, the barrel aimed steady. "No, Caleb," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "The only regret here is yours. You thought fear would keep this town under your thumb. Not anymore." Behind him, Tom Grayson stepped forward, shovel gripped like a battle axe. Mrs. Carter stood beside him, blade glinting. One by one, the townsfolk shifted closer, forming a wall behind Jack, their fear burning into defiance. Abigail's chest heaved, her pitchfork trembling in her hands, but she held her ground. She stood not behind Jack, but beside him, eyes blazing with a courage she hadn't known she possessed. Lily's small face peered from the window, wide-eyed, but trust shone there too. Trust in her father and now in Abigail. Caleb's men glanced at each other, unease flickering in their hard expressions. They weren't used to resistance. They weren't used to facing a town ready to fight. "You think these farmers will stand against me?" Caleb barked, his voice rising, desperate to reassert control. Jack's jaw tightened, but it was Abigail who spoke before he could. Her voice, clear and ringing, cut through the night. "They already are." For a heartbeat, silence stretched across the snowy yard. The words hung there, fragile yet unbreakable. Abigail's cheeks burned, her heart pounding, but she didn't look away. Caleb snarled, spurring his horse forward a step. His men shifted uncertainly. Then Jack cocked the rifle with a sharp click, the sound final. "Last warning," Jack said, steel in his tone. "You ride out now or you don't ride out at all." The wind howled through the broken trees, carrying with it the weight of the standoff. Caleb's sneer faltered, his eyes darting to the determined faces staring him down. He spat in the snow, yanked his reins hard, and turned his horse. "Fine," he spat, his voice bitter. "But this ain't over." One by one, his men wheeled their horses, following him into the fading light, their bravado crumbling with each hoofbeat. The yard fell quiet except for the ragged breaths of the townsfolk. Slowly, weapons lowered. Relief rippled like a wave. Abigail exhaled, her arms weak, the pitchfork clattering from her grasp. Jack lowered his rifle, his eyes scanning the retreating riders until they vanished. Then he turned, meeting Abigail's gaze. "You stood your ground," he said, his voice low, steady, but touched with something more, something that made her chest ache. Abigail swallowed hard, emotion choking her. "I couldn't let them near Lily," she whispered. Jack's eyes softened, pride flickering in their depths. He nodded once. "You belong here, Abigail. Don't ever doubt that." Her heart stuttered at his words. For the first time since the auction block, she felt not like a possession, not like a burden, but like a part of something worth fighting for. That night, the ranch was quiet again, though the air still hummed with the echoes of confrontation. The townsfolk stayed for a while, warming themselves by Jack's fire, their voices low but steady as they spoke of plans, patrols, watch rotations, and the start of a resistance. When they finally left, Abigail found herself standing by the hearth, her hands curled into fists around the woolen blanket draped over her shoulders. She couldn't shake the image of Caleb's sneer, the way his eyes had burned with promise. This ain't over. Her stomach twisted, but then she remembered how Jack hadn't wavered, how the townsfolk had stepped forward, how Lily had trusted her to stand guard. That memory warmed her against the creeping fear. Jack came in from checking the barn, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Lily was already curled up on the cot by the fire, clutching her little doll. Abigail turned to him, words tangling on her tongue. "You should have let me go," she whispered, her voice tight. "He won't stop, not until he has me back." Jack cut her off, his tone quiet but sharp. Don't say you're a burden. He set his rifle by the door, then looked at her, steady as ever. Warwick wants you to believe you're nothing but property. That's how he controls people. But you're not his. And you're not going anywhere. Abigail's throat tightened, and she lowered her gaze. She'd heard men speak with claim before, but Jack's words weren't a claim. They were a promise. I don't understand you, she murmured. Most men, they'd have taken something from me already, demanded payment. Jack's jaw flexed, his eyes darkening. Abigail, he said, his voice low, carrying a weight that stilled her trembling. I didn't buy you. I freed you. What you do with your life, your choices, those are yours. No one touches that but you. The words hit her harder than the cold ever could. For so long she'd guarded her innocence like a crumbling wall, fearing the moment someone tore it down. And now, standing in this stranger's home, she felt a kind of protection she'd never known. For the first time, Abigail's shoulders eased. A fragile trust, fragile but real, began to take root. The days that followed were restless. Jack kept his rifle close, patrolling the land at dawn and dusk. Townsfolk came and went, posting lookouts, repairing weak spots in the fences, laying plans should Warwick strike again. Redstone, once a place where people bowed their heads, was stirring awake. Abigail worked harder, her hands raw from hauling water and scrubbing floors. She fed chickens, gathered firewood, and helped Lily with her letters. Every small task grounded her, tethering her to the ranch more firmly than chains ever had. Yet at night, when the house went still, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. The shadow of Warwick's threat loomed. But so too did the memory of Jack's steady voice, and Lily's innocent drawings of the three of them together. One evening, Lily crawled into Abigail's lap by the fire, holding out a crooked daisy chain she'd made from dried weeds. It's for you, Lily said, her smile wide. So you won't be sad no more. Abigail's chest tightened, tears burning her eyes. She bent her head, kissing the crown of the girl's hair. Thank you, Lily, she whispered, her voice breaking. Across the room, Jack watched silently, his eyes softening at the sight. For the first time, Abigail didn't feel like an outsider. She felt, hesitantly, terrifyingly, like she belonged. But Caleb Warwick wasn't a man who accepted defeat. And in the shadows of Redstone, his men were already sharpening their blades. Jack's knife stilled against the half-shaped horse, the firelight dancing across his rough features. He looked at Abigail, really looked, as though her words revealed more than just a dream. They revealed a soul still unbroken, still yearning despite the hurt. A school, he repeated, quiet, almost to himself. That's a mighty fine thing, Abigail. Town's young ones could use it. Lord knows they deserve more than just chores and fields. Lily perked up, her little hands clutching the colored stub of a crayon. Could I go too, Miss Abigail? Could I learn my letters proper? The question struck Abigail deep. Her throat tightened, but she smiled faintly and brushed a strand of hair from Lily's cheek. Yes, sweetheart. You'd be my first pupil. Jack's chest rose and fell, pride softening the lines of his grief. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. Maybe this place could be more than a ranch, he said. Maybe it could be a beginning for all of us. The fire cracked, sending sparks into the chimney. For the first time since the auction, Abigail felt something stir that wasn't fear or shame. It was hope, fragile yet steady. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was imagining a future. But outside, beyond the snow and the silence, shadows still lingered. Caleb Warwick nursed his pride, and men like him didn't forget defeat easily. Though the ranch felt like a sanctuary, Abigail knew storms had a way of finding their way back across the plains. Still, as Lily leaned against her and Jack watched with a quiet strength, Abigail dared to believe. Maybe this time she would not face those storms alone. Abigail rose early the next morning, the pale light of dawn spilling across the frosted window panes. The smell of wood smoke lingered in the air, and the steady thud of Jack's axe echoed from the yard. She wrapped herself in the borrowed coat, her breath clouding in the chill, and pressed her palm to the glass. The land stretched wide and white, quiet except for the low murmur of cattle. She had never known such stillness. No voices shouting her worth in coin, no leering eyes measuring her like a prize. Just the silence of winter and the weight of her own choices. At the table, Lily sat swinging her legs, tracing letters Abigail had drawn for her the night before. The child's tongue poked out in concentration as she whispered, A, B, C. Abigail's lips curved, a pride she hadn't expected warming her chest. You've got the makings of a fine scholar, she said gently, kneeling beside Lily. One day, you'll read every book you can find. Lily giggled. Do books got cow stories? Some do, Abigail chuckled, tucking a strand of hair behind Lily's ear. And if not, maybe you'll write them yourself. Jack came in then, snow clinging to his boots, cheeks flushed from the cold. He paused at the sight of Abigail bent beside his daughter, their heads so close they might have been kin. Something flickered in his eyes, something unspoken, softer than admiration, steadier than gratitude. You're good with her, he said simply, setting the axe by the door. Abigail rose, brushing flour from her hands. Children deserve someone who believes in them. I never had that. Her voice faltered, but she did not look away. Jack studied her. The silence between them waited with understanding. Maybe you do now, he said at last. The words settled over her like the warmth of the fire, heavy and disarming. For the first time, Abigail felt the fragile walls she had built begin to crack. Not from fear, but from the possibility of belonging. But beyond the ranch, the world shifted. Caleb Warwick's name was still muttered in saloons and whispered across fences. Men who had ridden with him lingered in the hills, nursing grudges. Safety was never more than borrowed time. And Abigail knew. If she was to claim her dream, if she was to protect the little life she was building here, she would need more than borrowed safety. She would need courage. The days passed in a rhythm that felt almost like healing. Abigail rose with the dawn, her hands finding purpose in kneading bread, tending chickens, and guiding Lily's small fingers over letters scratched on scrap paper. Each chore, once a reminder of servitude, now felt like a choice, an anchor tying her to something steadier than fear. Jack watched quietly, never pressing, never demanding more than she could give. His silences were not cold but patient, as though he knew she needed space to find her footing. When the nights grew long, he would stoke the fire and carve little animals for Lily, a rabbit, a horse, a bird, and leave them on the mantel. Abigail found herself tracing their edges when no one was looking, the smooth with strange comfort beneath her fingertips. Yet shadows lingered. Sometimes, when she heard boots crunching in the snow or the slam of a door, her chest tightened, bracing for chains, for laughter, for Caleb Warwick's smirk. Even in dreams, she heard the auctioneer's call, the cruel weight of being sold like stock. She woke with a start more nights than she cared to admit. One evening, as the wind howled against the shutters, Lily curled in Abigail's lap with a blanket and whispered, "You won't leave, will you?" The child's voice was so small, trembling with a fear Abigail recognized too well. Her throat tightened. She smoothed Lily's hair and said softly, "No, sweet one, not unless you want me gone." Lily shook her head fiercely, eyes wide. "You're like a mama angel. You keep the bad men away." The words broke something loose inside her. Tears stung her eyes, not from sorrow but from the startling thought that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't only surviving here, she was needed. From his chair by the fire, Jack's gaze lifted. Their eyes met across the glow of the hearth, and though no words passed, Abigail felt the steady truth of him. He had seen her pain, her shame, her trembling, and still offered her a place by the fire. Outside, winter deepened, and with it, the quiet sense that time was holding its breath. Caleb Warwick nursed his wounded pride in the dark corners of Redstone, gathering whispers like kindling. But within the walls of Jack Harlan's ranch, something fragile was taking root, a belonging neither Jack nor Abigail had dared hope for. And so, Redstone's winter gave way to a spring unlike any before. The ranch that once echoed with silence now rang with laughter, the promise of a school taking root in the soil where fear once ruled. Abigail Turner, once seen as property, now stood as a teacher, a dreamer, a woman cherished not for what she had endured but for what she could give. Jack Harlan, steady as the land itself, found peace not in solitude, but in the bond that had grown between them. And little Lily, with her crayons and boundless faith, had unknowingly stitched them all together into a family. The horizon stretched wide and wild, the way of the West. But in that vastness, a small corner now belonged to them, stronger than Caleb Warwick's shadow, brighter than the scars of the past. Because here, in Redstone, love had done what bullets and fear never could. It had built something that would last. The months rolled on, and with them, the frame of the schoolhouse rose beam by beam. Children who had once lingered in the dust with nothing to their name now came running each morning to watch, their laughter chasing away the memory of Warwick's threats. Mothers brought bread and stew to feed the workers. Fathers lent their hands to hammering nails and lifting walls. What began as Abigail's whispered dream by the fire had become the town's shared promise. On the day the roof was set, Abigail stood back, her hands pressed to her apron, tears slipping down her cheeks unbidden. She could almost see it, the rows of rough-hewn benches, the chalk dust on her fingers, the little voices learning letters for the first time. And beside her, Jack's quiet pride anchored her, his calloused hand brushing hers, steady and sure. That night, under a sky ablaze with stars, the three of them, Jack, Lily, and Abigail, sat on the porch. The half-built school stood in the distance like a sentinel of hope. Lily leaned against Abigail's side, her head nodding with sleep, while Jack lit his pipe and stared out across the fields. "You gave this town more than a school," he said finally, his voice low. "You gave them back their courage." Abigail turned her gaze to him, the firelight catching her eyes. "I only shared a dream," she whispered. Jack shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Sometimes that's all it takes." The wind was cool, carrying the scent of cedar and fresh-turned soil. For the first time, Abigail felt no shadow at her back, no chain around her heart. She was no longer a girl marked by what had been taken, but a woman defined by what she had chosen to build. And she chose this ranch, this man, this child, this future. The schoolhouse would open soon, and with it, a new chapter not just for her, but for all of Redstone. Here's a rewritten version with the same warmth and impact, but a smoother flow and stronger pull. The blanket that once shielded her from the cold now wraps her in the warmth of family, and Lily's simple drawing carries a dream that will live for generations. If this story of love, courage, and redemption in the Wild West touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to Legs of Love Stories. More tales of hope, healing, and triumph await. So hit that button, join our frontier family, and ride with us into the next unforgettable adventure.